The overdue timesheet and expense report, timesheets and expense approval alerts. Of course, there's a different alert for timesheets than expenses. And I like using this one, but you probably don't have to send quite as many out, maybe up to 3 notices at 4 or 12-hour intervals. And again, use that fictitious email address so you don't start getting reasons through email when it's really a system-generated activity. Now the budget alerts, I don't think the budget alerts are actually used as much as they could be, and I do know why most people are not using them. Budget alerts to most people mean that there's some kind of proactive action that should be taken to monitor whether a project is getting near the end of its budget or getting close to burning through all of its budget. Okay? The budget alerts in OpenAir are actually, they depend on actual data. When I say actual data, I mean actual approved data, which is where the challenge comes in. Because as people are working on the projects, you want sort of an alert that, okay, people have an in-progress or open timesheet. Time is getting spent against the hours that I have allocated, and I'm really concerned that I'm going to lose out. You don't want to wait until the timesheet's been sent to you and then you approve the timesheet and then the system tells you, oh, by the way, you're over budget, because you're monitoring it. So the budget alert, for it to be really effective, what I recommend to people is set the threshold of when you should get an alert much lower than you would normally send it, because that way, since it's dealing with actuals, you'll know that you have actually burned half of the project. That should give you an indication of are you on track or not. And if you're not sure where I'm talking about for these budget alerts, all of the alerts are actually in the administration module under application settings for the various modules. So the timesheet settings has the alert. The expense report settings has alerts. And the budgets are related to projects, so they have the alerts as well. And if you look at any of these budget alerts, you can have them run every day and it will send an email to the people that you designate for the projects that you designate, which is why it's a bit powerful as far as an alert is concerned. The challenge for many people is it only deals with charges, which depend on actuals, or approved hours, which depend on actuals or approvals in the system. So in many cases, if you would want an alert that says, hey, tell me that 90% of my budget is already burned, you'd want to know that as people have been putting time on timesheets, not waiting until they're approved. So I usually generally suggest to people, maybe set this to 70. And then you can actually, a project manager could set it up to say, I always want, for all of my projects, I want to know if I'm hitting that 70% threshold, because that's going to give me a double check real quick. And then, of course, you can customize the email and send it to yourself. So budget alerts are not something it's not like a timesheet alert where you set one and you send it to everyone. I really like to educate project managers to be able to set those budget alerts up, because it's only really to benefit them on an individual basis or even on all of their project basis. And the more they know about those budget alerts, the more they can take advantage of using them for their information. Okay. There is one other type of alert, and it's called the Resource Utilization Alert. It has good intentions, but it is a bit limited in how you can set it up. If you've ever wondered what it looks like, be careful turning it on, because I'm going to tell you why in just a second. If you do turn on the utilization alert, what it does is it will look for a defined period in the future to see how many people have exceeded a defined threshold. So, most people say, well, I want to make sure nobody's over allocated, so you'll set the threshold to maybe 100%. I like to set it at about 130 because, there's occasionally an over allocation here and there in people's accounts. But what it will do is, as it looks at everyone's utilization in the resources module, it will send an email to the manager that's named on the user record, to the manager of that person, if that person at any point in time has a schedule of booked time greater than the threshold. And how it does that is it doesn't send an individual email to each manager with their resources. It sends an email combined with all the resources to all the managers that own those resources. So it's not as nice as the other alerts, but it does have a purpose. So depending on the size of your company, you may actually consider turning it on and playing with it. If you are a global organization, I would recommend not playing with it because you may be sending out quite a number of emails that may cause some confusion in your organization. But it's under Application Settings, Resource Settings, and if you click on Alert, it has one type of alert called Utilization Alert. And as you can see here, it's very generic on its configuration. You give it a threshold and you save it. And behind the scenes, it's going to figure out who to send the email to and who's impacted by this. So let's move on to some of the standard notifications. So those are the alerts, and those are the ones that take action. Like I said, timesheet and overdue approvals are probably the most popular. But there's a number of standard notifications that everyone gets all the time, and people I don't think are aware that they can control those or they can modify those to be more effective. So I think of two categories of notifications. One is the workflows, things like a timesheet is submitted and ready for review, a timesheet's been rejected, a timesheet's been approved, a timesheet, an invoice is rejected, all the different things that have that open, submitted, approved, rejected phasing available in the system. Those are workflow-related emails, and OpenAir has always a standard set of email content that gets sent out. Then there's the informational emails, which are basically, they're all over the place as far as system configuration points. But you can send notifications when you assign somebody to a task, or when you make them an owner of a new project, or you book them to a project and they get notified when they're booked to the project, or they're assigned to an issue. So they may require action, but in most cases it's more of an information to support business process. So let's take a look at the workflow notifications. So these typically are a request and a rejection or approval. And for almost all of the workflow notifications, you can actually have configuration on the project and the user level for approvals, where all of the item routing happens at the project level first, then goes to the user. Now the project level doesn't understand schedule requests, so that's sort of irrelevant. Actually, at the user level, it doesn't really the user level should be able to handle everything else. I think invoicing may not be available there. But the intent of a workflow notification is action is required. Somebody needs to do something, okay? But the only exception to that is, if you get an email that says it's ready for review, that means you have to review it. If you get an email that says your timesheet's been rejected, that means you have to fix it, okay? I would say the only notification that's not really an action required is that, by the way, your timesheet's been approved, okay? So in some cases, those approval emails may be noise. They're just extra emails that they don't have to do anything with them. It doesn't help them understand what's going on in the system any better, or doesn't impact them personally. So I would consider those noise, and think about maybe turning those off. Things like the timesheet approval email, the one that says, hey, your timesheet's been approved. What does that benefit to the end user? It may benefit them quite a lot, and of course then keep it. But if it doesn't benefit them at all, turn it off. And you can do that by emailing OpenAir support. Other ones, such as my expense report was approved, your business process may say that if you get that email, that means finance has finished approving or processing it, and an approval message means you are getting reimbursed. Okay? So I wouldn't say all the approvals are worthless, but I would say that some of them actually are noise. Turn them off. Limit the emails that are going out that are not benefiting the end user. When you do route things for approval and workflow, just be aware that there's names of people you can put in, but of course the approval processes. And we touched on these last webinar about the integrations and the automation activities that are in there. There's ways to route things according to who your manager is, and if it's you, send it to someone else. There's ways to configure sort of an auto approval option that says, go ahead and send it to 2 people at once, and whoever gets to it first approves it. There's the routing based on criteria. So send it to someone only if the expense report is over $2,500. So that limits people having to get the email notifications and take action every time, even though it may not follow policy or require their efforts. The more unnecessary actions people have to take, the more they'll get annoyed by the system. So consider using some of these features, and even like this escalation feature that was on the approval processes, to say if person X doesn't get to it in a couple days, send it to person Y, because if person Y gets that email, they'll know that's an escalation and they need to take action. So I get a couple of questions quite often, so I thought I would throw them into the mix here is, why do I keep getting multiple emails for the same timesheet approval? John Smith submits his timesheet. He's worked on 4 of my projects. I get 4 emails about that. And the reason for that is the approval process configuration is, there's 3 ways that it's controlled. What approval process do you have defined at the project level? What approval process you have defined at the user level? And then what are your approval settings in general? So let's talk about, here's the timesheet. John Doe has put in 3 projects. They're managed across 2 different managers. So when he submits his timesheet, an email for each project, because on the project level they've said the project owner has to review it. Each of those projects, because they're independent, send an email to the project owner. In this case, the first 2 projects have the same manager. He gets 2 emails. And the third project has one email, and she gets 1 email. Okay, one manager, and she gets one email. So you realize that, and then at the user level, the manager person is assigned. So the manager will not actually get 3 emails. The manager will actually just get 1 email saying the timesheet is ready for approval, because that is at the user level versus the project level. So that explains a lot of why all of the emails are coming in. It's because you've defined things at the project level versus the user level. And that is probably necessary to support your business process. But there is a consideration. So a lot of times I'll get the question of, well, why the heck am I getting, I'm the manager, I just want 1 email, but I'm getting 3 emails. I'm getting 3 emails just like the PMs are each getting an email. Why am I getting so many emails? And that actually is a simple explanation of the project is holding the entire approval process, and the project says, first route it to the project manager, then route it to the manager. And on the user record, it's probably set to self-approve. So what that means is for each project, because they're independent, it sends an individual email to the project manager and an individual email to the manager, when in fact the manager should really just get 1. And that's where you would want to set the PM approval at the project level and the manager approval at the user level, for example. So here's another example I get, and this doesn't happen as often as it used to because a lot of standard configurations now have this approach. And the question is, why do I have to approve the same exact timesheet multiple times? I get 3 emails because I'm managing 3 projects, and I open up the timesheet, and I approve it once, and it comes right back and asks me to approve it again. So I approve it again, and it comes right back, and I have to approve it again. Why do I need to approve it for 3 times? Well, the answer is because you have been asked to approve 3 different projects. And the configuration you have in your system is you must not be allowed to see all the timesheet data. And if you are allowed to see all the timesheet data, you don't have an internal switch turned on that says, if I can see all the timesheet data, the minute I approve it for everything that I'm responsible for. So if you're seeing that kind of behavior and you're annoyed with having to approve the same thing 3 times or 4 times, check with OpenAir support to see if you have that auto approve, if Project Approver can view all time entry switch turned on. Now, workflow is something people take advantage of. It comes standard in the system. But there's informational notifications, and those typically revolve around something's been created, something's been modified, and something's been closed. Okay? And sometimes those emails or notifications actually do require action, but for the most part, they're designed to come out because they're supporting the process and enforcing the process that has been configured around the system. So here's some reasons for informational emails. So knowing when a project has been created, or moved to a new stage. And that actually is controlled in the project stage configuration, if you're not quite sure, because all of these informational ones are all over the place as far as configuration is concerned. So let's go to the application settings and project settings. And if we go to project stages, open one of these up, and at the bottom, lo and behold, here's how we can control who gets notified if a project's been created in a stage or it's been changed to the stage. Unfortunately, what you'll see is missing is you don't have the ability to control who else sees it other than the people you select. So in a global environment, multiple offices or multiple countries, you end up having to send the email to the same set of people regardless of where it's going. Okay, probably not very convenient. And then there's also the one on the project level under the notification section, which says notify the project owner when a change in ownership is made. And what that also means is let someone know when there's a new project and they're the project manager. So those are two already, and they're not in the settings area very, very easily. Bookings being entered, and when should people be notified about the fact that they've been booked to work on a project. So bookings actually can be set up to send notifications to the person or to the manager of the person, but then there's a second level of control that you can say, well, based on the type of booking it is, I can decide whether I want to email someone or not. And that configuration is found in the administration area under resource management, the resource settings. And the very basic piece first is under other settings, there's the ability to notify the resource and notify the manager of the resource. So in this example, I've actually turned on notifying the resource. The other half of it is if I'm deciding to use booking types, then I can decide, you know what, if I'm just requesting someone, I don't want them to get an email every time I do a request or a tentative or a soft book or whatever your process is calling for. So here on the request, once you enable notifications, you get the ability to control it by booking type to say, you know what, if you create an allocation or a booking with this type, don't send any emails. It's premature to notify the person. And that makes the email communication cleaner so that when someone does get an email from the system about resource bookings, it's confirmed, which means they're actually supposed to be doing work and they should follow up with the project manager, and therefore the booking notification is useful then versus just being noise filling up the inbox. Another one is the project task assignment. This is not used very often because anytime you update like the date on a task or the budget on a task, it will actually resend emails out to the people who've been assigned to the task. So I don't see this used very frequently. And if you're not familiar with where it is in the system, it's actually back on that project form under the notification section. I overlooked it right here. So notify assigned users when a task is added or changed. And that means any kind of change. And for most people, that's a little too much information being sent. So, and then of course you could also CC other people on top of that. So you could really be sending lots of emails out. So I don't see people using this feature very often. But one feature I do see people using, and that's the last one on the list, which is the issues assignment. And really the issues assignment and indication of closure is sort of a manual workflow. There's no request for approval, approved type exchange. It's more of a, hey, I need you to work on something, and then when you're done with it, you close it, which sends an email to the project owner to say, I'm done with it. I think that is more of a task assignment, but a lot of people will take advantage of these notifications to create a mini workflow and repurpose that issue form to be something more meaningful. Like, I need you to write up this document. I need you to communicate with finance, and more of a to-do list type thing. And then the person who does it can close that item, and that will send an email back to the project owner. So a nice, useful set of sort of notifications that basically mimic a manual workflow. Informational emails, as you may have noticed if you're using any of these, they have a standard format. Typically there's a generic subject line in the email. It's got the object in it saying, new project created or booking allocation scheduled. And it's got basic information in it like, if you got a project creation, here's the budget, here's how much it is, or here's when it starts, you're the project owner, here's the name of the project. Allocation, it could be you've been allocated to project X for this date to this date for this many hours. Just real basic information, because the intent of getting the email is to inform you that something has happened, and that the reason for the informational email is to give you that key knowledge to take whatever process step you need to take. Okay. But I will say that the standard format of emails has the basic information, but there really is a lot more you can do with them, and that's where email templates come in, something that some people have experimented with quite a bit. And email templates are a way to sort of make the content more robust. In fact, I actually have this new project alert. The screenshots here show how I've configured it. Every time I create a new project, the person who I've named as the project owner gets this wonderful message that says, lucky you, you are now the proud manager of the following project. It identifies the start date or expected start date, when I've started scheduling resources for them, and what is the total budget amount that I expect the project to be coming at. So it's real basic information that I've given them. And the reason, you may ask, why am I giving them first booking date? I've been managing the proposal or the pipeline activity with a forecast of resource needs. So I'm sort of pre-populating the resource schedule for the person who's going to take ownership of it. If you're not sure where these email templates are, they're actually in the administration module. So we keep going back to the administration module for communication, but you can see how it's pretty easy to sort of overlook all of the communication options because they're sort of flittered throughout the entire application. And down here in the email templates, there are a number of email templates you can use. And when you look at any certain email template, it gives you categories of that type. So new, modify, delete, or close is typically the standard template types that you can take advantage of in the system. So anything that has kind of a workflow with it, or informational email that comes standard with the system, you can actually create a more robust email template. So those authorizations, bookings, issues, all the things that have either workflow, some workflow, or informational email content has an email template that you can take advantage of. Make the templates work for you to pass critical information on, instead of saying, now I get these silly emails from OpenAir and it doesn't tell me anything. I really need more information. Okay. So the standard notifications, if you do set up an email template, they will automatically use the template. You don't have the option to say, use the template sometimes and use the standard one other times. So if you set up like the new project alert, like I did, the new project notification, anytime I create a project, that email template is always used. But if I do like the booking email, I don't actually have a template for the booking email. I get the standard configuration for the bookings. Okay. The email templates, they're a global setting, so they can't actually be customized per project or per user, where a lot of things in the system obviously can. So if you decide that you want that lucky you're the proud owner of project XYZ, everyone gets that email if they're included in that notification. You don't have the option to change it to be in German if you're in Germany, and Spanish if you're in Spain. But there is a conditional option, and that it happened to come out in May of last year. There was a release that included what was called customized email notifications. That feature introduced the capability to actually have some kind of trigger or conditional statements that say only send this email notification alert out if the following is true. Okay. So I've turned a couple of these on in the system, and I'm going to show you some examples of where I think you could take advantage of these notifications to introduce more adoption of your processes and have OpenAir communicate in a smarter way than what you may be doing or maybe not be doing at all with the system. So before the enhancement was come out, there was a lot of changes to the system about how you can be aware that somebody's proxying in for you and doing all this stuff. So how do you know a proxy person has done stuff? And I think that drove a lot of where this customized email notification came from. You enable them by an internal switch, and you have to tell OpenAir support which notifications you want. So this presentation has the list of what's available, so you're welcome to grab this PowerPoint and use it as a reference when you're working through support to turn things on and off. If you do turn on a custom notification, you may also consider disabling any of the standard notifications that go with it. And I'm going to show you an example here where sometimes you leave them on, sometimes you turn them off. And what do I mean by that? A custom notification is you can define it to happen only if the following things happen. But if those following things happen, do you still want a standard email to go out or not? And you'll see what I mean when I get into the examples next. The customer notifications are available for pretty much a standard set of items as we've talked about before. Timesheets, resources, invoices, expenses, proposals, projects, and purchases, and of course the variety of sub-items within each of those areas. So what can actually happen in a customization? So here's an example of a timesheet approval notification. And what you can do is you can see at the top here there's a send notification option, and the two criteria are anytime this timesheet is approved or when the following criteria is met. After that, you can identify who actually should be notified. These are not the people responsible for review or approval or anything like that. They are really more informational email. So who should be getting this informational email? And you also have the ability to add external email addresses, which means outside of OpenAir. Okay? Then, of course, you can customize the email message body very similar to the email template. So this is sort of building on the email template notification. So, you know, I picked a couple of examples just to get people thinking about how could I use this. And one is notifying HR whenever time off has been taken on a timesheet, maybe because they have to make sure on a pay period basis they are aware of people putting time off or vacation on timesheets, and if they've missed a couple of pay periods, maybe their current pay period report is not going to pick it up. Okay? So what you could do is you could actually turn on the customized email notifications for timesheets. You could set up one for timesheet submission notification and say when these conditions are met, which means the client project includes and whatever your vacation project is. Mine is called time off. Okay? I want to also notify HR@topstepconsulting.com, and I will customize the email message to say there's time off on this timesheet. Person so-and-so has submitted timesheet or time off data on this timesheet. Okay? That is a custom email meant for HR, and it's only going to be sent if the timesheet has this project in this particular project on the timesheet. So you'll notice that, well, of course, if the timesheet's submitted, I can't stop sending the emails to everyone else that has to approve it, like the project managers and stuff. So I'm leaving the standard notification turned on. But in this specific instance, I'm adding a customized criteria to send a sort of an FYI email over to HR so they know what's coming in a timesheet, even though they're not involved in the approval at all. If you want to see where these are located, they're actually configured in the administration module, particular to the settings area that you want. So application settings, and in this case, timesheet settings, notifications, and then from a new menu, you can see how I can create these custom notifications across these different types of actions. All right, so this is workflow. So do you want just this to be the email, or do you want this to be an exception for additional notification on top of the standard email notification? Here's another one that, as I was coming up with some of these scenarios, I thought this might be a good one, and that's notifying the PM and the people who are on the project that the project is now closed. Okay? Typical scenario, project's closed, people try to put a timesheet in the system, they can't find the timesheet, or they can't find the project, or they try to submit the timesheet and they get that error message, this project is no longer active. Okay? So now you're trying to figure out what to do at this time. You're calling up people to fix your timesheet. What about letting them know that something's been closed the minute it's closed? And in this case, I turned on the project notifications, and I'm creating one for when the project is modified. Okay? And I set up these conditions that says when the project is in, and the 3 stages I picked were actually, it's in at risk, live, and closed. So those are the 3 project stages where things should be actively worked, or of course closed means the project is no longer active. So I said if the project's in one of those 3 stages and the active project checkbox has been changed to no, then I want the loaded cost resource on that project and the project manager to get an email, which of course would have custom content that would say, this project has now been closed by so-and-so person. Okay? A nice informational email that lets everyone know what the status of that job is. There is no standard customization, there's no standard notification to give people this type of email. You can only get it through this customized email. And I think maybe, as you're looking at this example, you can see how maybe adding a few unique types of notifications could actually save a lot of headache, especially at quarter end when people are really trying to get those timesheets in and they're scrambling to get those active jobs reopened or closed or whatever they have to do. If I go into the projects area here, application settings, project settings, here's notifications here that I've turned on. And you can see I have a lot of the same stuff that I can if it's just an informational email. And I can create multiple of these notifications because they have specific criteria set on them. Now, the last example I was thinking, well, what if you want to notify the PM that a resource schedule has been changed? Somebody changed the booking, modified the booking. You may be aware that on the booking form, if you're using resource bookings, there is a checkbox that says notify user if modified. Okay? Notify requester if modified. But it does require that either you use form permissions to default that to be done, or that the person who's making the allocation request or booking request check that box. So you're relying on someone to take an action to get this information. Okay? What if it's actually the resource manager who's creating these allocations and somebody goes and changes that allocation? The project manager is the one that's getting impacted because they're the ones that are getting impacted by the resource availability. What if it's not the PM that's creating the allocation? What if it's not the PM that's making the modification? How do you make sure the PM is aware of the change proactively? We train a lot with users to say, well, they should be monitoring the project and they should be writing reports, but we're all tied to BlackBerries, we're all tied to Twitter and Skype and texting and stuff. So, getting a quick FYI email that says, hey, your resource allocations have been moved or updated, that's something that I can react to proactively. I may have a problem now because I have Sammy next Thursday instead of this Friday when I need Sammy this Friday. Okay. So I turned on the notifications at the for resources, and I created a custom notification, so booking modified notification. So anytime a booking is modified. And I didn't actually select any criteria. I just said when any booking is updated. I don't care why it was updated or what project it is or anything, just any booking update. I want to make sure that the project manager is made aware that that changed. Okay? And that's it. I just, I can customize the email content, but that's it. I just want to make sure that everyone's getting it. In that case, you probably want to hide that notify requester box on the booking form so you don't duplicate things or just disable that standard notification. But this is a way that you can ensure people are getting information versus relying on them to take action to get information. So, another possible way to ensure people are using the system correctly. The last type of communication, and I think a lot of people on the phone already know this, is really sharing the reports and emailing the reports. So if you don't have this feature turned on, it's a schedule feature where you basically, any report you own, you can schedule it to run at a certain time. But there is a couple of do's and don'ts I want to make sure people are aware of. And I joke with a lot of my customers when we go through training on this, but it is really true. In the do's area, you definitely want a delivery period that supports your process. So if you have to go to a resource meeting on Tuesday, getting the resource schedule on Friday night is probably a little too early to be adequate and relevant to a Tuesday meeting. It should probably be either the night before on Monday night or on Tuesday morning, giving people a couple hours to get ready for the meeting. Also leverage the fact that a user does not have to be a user in the system. To get an email out of OpenAir with report data, you do not have to have a user account. Salespeople can get forecast data out of OpenAir simply by being a contact in the system, and the contact would typically be associated to your company name or something like that. And as long as they have an email address in the system, they could get a report. They do not use a license, but they still get key information in the OpenAir system. This is the don'ts that I want to make sure. I always go over this with my customers, and this is if you share this report with all the users, which means you're using that little share icon and you select all users, please do not decide that you really want to also email every single person a copy of your report. I still have not found a single situation where this is true, where people need this functionality. So just be aware of how many people you're sharing it with before you start emailing it all over the company. And if the report is no longer relevant or somebody's left the company, you may want to modify who you've shared it with or just stop sending it out altogether, especially if you have those automated client ones that you're sending out, project status on a weekly basis. When the project's over, you probably should stop it because otherwise it's going to keep sending emails to the customer and they'll wonder why they're getting blank data all the time. So you may be wondering, okay, this is a little overwhelming. I knew about alerts. I knew about standard emails, but the customized emails are crazy and the report delivery, so how am I supposed to coordinate all of this stuff? And my recommendation is set up a communication matrix. This is the one step I don't see people doing very often. And then figure out by each of the types of resources you need, who needs to know what, when, and maybe what the content should be and if there's any conditions that they need. Then from there, decide if you need custom notifications, if the standard are okay, if the email templates are needed to augment the information, and above all, make sure the emails are actually necessary. Get rid of those timesheet approved noise emails unless they actually serve a purpose in a confirmation loop for your process. So I mocked up this little example of, on the left-hand side, just list everything you know as far as the different notifications available in the system, the roles along the top, and then work through it. T&E, they only need reminders for late. The finance role should get a notification when the expense approval is approved, not be part of the approval, perhaps. Maybe the manager role only sees expenses over $2,500. So you can see how, if you set up this kind of grid, you'd be able to kind of work through who should see what and determine what to turn on when. It's a bit overwhelming sort of doing it piecemeal. You almost have to do this sort of map. So, communication is key in process adoption and making sure people are using the system, the fact that they're getting information in a timely manner. Communication doesn't replace personal communication, but the communications can certainly be more effective than being viewed as spam. So avoid any emails that don't serve a purpose because then the emails that are received will be much more visible. So thank you very much for coming to the webinar. As always, feel free to contact us. And since we know SuiteWorld's coming up and in everyone's mind, we are a gold sponsor this year of SuiteWorld. So please, if you're going, stop by our booth and say hi. We'd love to talk with you. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.